Do you like listening to nerds talk at length about incredibly niche topics that they know way too much about? Well, my friend, if that particular niche is turn-based strategy RPGs and ranking the different jobs and classes in them, this is the video for you. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my coverage of things like Final Fantasy Tactics, compilations of my videos about it, then a like on this video, a subscription to the channel, and support on my Patreon and my YouTube members would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. If you were not aware, this is a compilation of all three of my Final Fantasy Tactics tier list videos that I've put up over the last 2 months now, I think. Figured now that they're all out, I can compile all the information in one place as a definitive spot for you to find my opinions and my thoughts on all of the jobs and monster classes in FFT. This includes the War of the Lions version of the game, so we have some extra special classes in there. And I've gone ahead and trimmed out the intros and the outros just to clean up the video a little bit for you so you can enjoy uninterrupted and have one pretty clean flow for a video. So, hey, I hope you enjoy. Check out the list of everyone's patron and YouTube member names at the end of the video. They are the direct supporters of the channel, without whom it would be far harder for me to do what I do. And if you want to consider checking out the way to join that yourself, links to that is in the description. No further ado here, take it away past me, and everyone please enjoy. So today, Final Fantasy Tactics generic classes, not the busted unique classes that we all know are insane, alright, because those would pretty much all just be S tier, but all the generic classes in Final Fantasy Tactics, specifically the War of the Lions version that added a couple of classes. Simple concept, however, there's a couple stipulations and a couple rules of engagement for how we're going to be proceeding here. First off, we're going to go in order from pretty much the exact order that you unlock the classes, or at least how they're set up on the job wheel, in strategy guides, etc. We'll give a brief overview of what each class does, and then put it where it is going to go. There will be some consideration for particular combinations of a class and a different job's ability that maybe makes the class better than it would be normally. But the idea here is that from the moment that you're likely to have access to the class to the end of the game, how viable is it? How strong of a position will it hold in your team? And maybe does it start to fall off? If so, we can drop it down, that type of thing. Secondly, we have the calculator tier above S tier. You'll see it up at the top of the list right here. The reason I have that is for a few particular classes, like the calculator, that yes, are insanely busted and would absolutely be at the top of the tier list. However, they're odd cases because to get their full potential unlocked, it requires such an insane amount of grinding or setup that you could have very easily cleared the game 3 times over, and with classes that are far easier to use and get online. So it's a little bit awkward to say, well, yes, calculator is the best class in the game, because technically it is, but it just takes so long to get set up that it's not really worth it, and it's certainly not necessary. So classes like that are going to go in the calculator tiers. I don't feel like they really fit into the overall scope of jobs in Final Fantasy Tactics. So with those rules of engagement out of the way, we're going to start with Squire. Squire is one of your 2 starting classes. It is the physical-based class that is going to be the basis for all future classes going forward. It's relatively weak statistically, and it's got pretty poor skills, except for some absolutely vital support skills like Move +1 and a JP up. But seeing as how you really don't want to be in it any longer than the time that it's going to take to unlock those skills, it goes in D tier. Literally any other melee-based class is going to be better at it for a variety of different reasons than the Squire is. You're going to get terrible level ups if you stay in Squire. It's just not worth doing, so absolutely staying in D tier. Next up, we have Chemist. This is your first healing-based class that uses items to heal, because items are a skill in Final Fantasy Tactics, which is something that I love. And they can use knives, they can use guns, notably, and all around, they're phenomenal from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. They're also the basis for any magic classes. You're going to want to have someone as a chemist if you want to get them into mages later on. Chemist, to me, is absolutely an S tier class. You can have a character start as a chemist at the very beginning of Chapter 1 and have them still be a chemist by the time you finish clearing Orban Monastery at the end of Chapter 4, and you will be happy. They always have versatility. Items are always good. Their built-in item finder and throw items are phenomenal. The ability to use guns that have 100% accuracy at insane ranges It's just so useful. Chemists are phenomenal. I cannot overstate enough how much I love them. They are insanely strong. Use one. If you haven't played Final Fantasy Tactics or you haven't played it in a while and you're planning on going back and playing it, Chemist is the way to go, man. Next up, we have Knight. Knight is your first real melee powerhouse, built to have heavy armor, a shield, and a sword, stand on the front line, absorb hits, and be really hard to bring down while dealing out a good amount of damage and breaking enemy stats and weapons/armor in the process. I really like Knights, but while they start out really strong, they definitely start to fall off by the end of the game. Can you use a Knight to the end of the game? Absolutely. Pretty much any class except for Squire you technically can, but if you're going for raw melee damage and capability, there's certainly way better options. They are one of the tankiest classes in the game, but that becomes less important as you get later into the game and have more capabilities for defense and healing. So I'm going to say that they reside solidly in B tier. It never really hurts to have a Knight, and they're super cool. I love them, but yeah, there's better options once you get later into the game. Archers, your first proper ranged physical class, and something that is near and dear to my heart because I'm a certified archery instructor. So hey, has a little bit of something going on there. They're pretty cool. If you attack from a greater height with a normal bow, you can get extra range. You can also use crossbows and a shield if you want to have a little bit more mid-range capability with some defensive stats. And all of their attacks and all of their skills are basically just stronger and stronger attacks that take longer and longer to charge. It's pretty much all they do, and that's kind of really bad. Bows don't have great damage output, they don't scale very well, and while you do have decent range with them, you have way better ranged options through certain abilities, other weapon types, magic, etc. So archers are okay at the start of the game. They can have certain battles where they're situationally very useful because of terrain, but that's a map by map issue, not really a strength of the class. And while they can be okay if you combine their long range with certain other physical skills, like the Knight's Break skill to break things from a distance, it's really not the best. They get decent speed, decent damage, decent range, but there's better options everywhere else. I think they're solidly in C tier, unfortunately. Hey, get up there. Next up, the classic, the Black Mage. The Black Mage, the absolute kings and queens of magical damage output. This is going to be your first ranged magical damage class. And much like the Chemist, as soon as you get a Black Mage online, you could use them as a Black Mage for the entire rest of the game and never switch them again. Black Mage is absolutely an S tier class. They devastate. They've got, very fragile defensive stats. They've got low HP. But my God, if you get a Black Mage set up with an Elemental Rod, the spell that matches that Elemental Rod, gear that boosts their magic attack stack, and then Arcane Strength, I mean, you're set. Jane's been playing Final Fantasy Tactics on and off in her own time just because I encouraged her to. She wanted to check it out. And her Black Mage is a horror on the battlefield. Dropping Fyras and Fyragas, boom, all over the battlefield. Dudes dying left and right, explosions everywhere. It's insane. One of the best magic users in the game. They are phenomenal. Moving on to White Mage, or Priest, if you are an old head for the original translation. Not nearly as potent as their offensive counterparts. The White Mage is, of course, the healing and support class, as it is in pretty much any Final Fantasy game. Certainly solid and definitely very useful early in the game. However, as you get later on and you have a greater variety of different healing skills at your disposal, don't wind up being quite as useful. Realistically, a lot of the time people like to get a bunch of the healing and status debuff or removal skills, some protect and shell, and then take the White Mage ability and slap it on a different class like Black Mage that's going to have better magic attack and as such better healing. So it's kind of a backup class, makes sense for something that's a support, but like it's not really going to stand super well on its own, and it does tend to fall off later in the game. I'm still going to say that it's pretty A rank because the ability to get a lot of AoE healing at range, raise allies, cast Holy for big damage if you want, be able to put defensive buffs on, it's certainly quite solid, but it's not going to hold forever like the Black Mage is. Next we have Thieves, and Thieves are an interesting one. Thieves in a lot of games, are kind of like the rogue, your dodgy, crit-based class. It has a lot of speed, doesn't get hit very often, gets some good critical hits in, but folds if they get hit. Thief doesn't really have a lot of that damage and evasion. It has some evasion, but damage with daggers is pretty bad. It doesn't scale super well, and they don't have any skills that allow them to deal extra damage. Instead, what they do is steal things, exclusively. Gil, hearts, armor, accessories, weapons, and there's a lot of good to be had there. But anyone who's played Final Fantasy Tactics will tell you the main reason that you want a thief is to unlock later classes that require it, and then also to have someone who can go in and steal boss gear whenever you run into something that has high-level gear. Unless you're doing like end-game grinding to get all sorts of crazy gear off of generic enemies. But the majority of the time, you're looking to steal fancy knight swords and perfumes and things like that. It's not really a great combat class. It's not a class that I would use specifically for combat. And it can hold its own while you're getting someone trained up in the class, but it really is not going to be great. I'm going to plop it straight in C tier with Archer, which ironically is the class you use to unlock it. So, hey. Now, Monk. Monk is S tier. We don't even have to discuss it. We will, but like, Monk is S tier. Monk is insane as the next higher tier of physical damage dealer after things like Knights. And they're very interesting because their primary attack scales off of their Brave stat, including their physical attack. Like, their physical attack is important, but you want high Brave on a Monk. And the higher your Brave, the more ridiculous their weapon scaling and their damage becomes. The ability to use martial arts innately allows them to have other support skills like equip heavy armor or other such things. And the damage output and versatility that they have is just insane. They've got good move, they've got good HP, they can have all sorts of fun ranged options with Aura Blast, and they can heal with Chakra, restoring HP and MP. They can revive allies. This is where you start running into issues where the White Mage becomes less useful, because the Monk can do a lot of the White Mage does, while still also being a good physical damage dealer. Granted, the White Mage has the advantage of range, of course, so you have that going for you, but still, like, a Monk, again, you can get someone, make them a Monk, and leave them as a Monk for the rest of the game. There's a reason that one of the most popular builds for Ramza is to have him as Monk with the dual-wield ability from a ninja, or make him a ninja with the martial arts ability, either way, and have dual punching and just two-shot anything in the game. It's disgusting. It's so, so strong. Next up, we have Time Mage, and I have strong feelings about Time Mage. I think Time Mage is going to go squarely in B because what it does is really good, but a lot of the options that it has don't actually wind up being useful. Time Mages are haste bots, most of the time. You unlock haste, which is one of the, I think actually the cheapest spell that you can unlock in Time Mage, and then you just run around spamming haste on your team for the rest of the time that you have that character as a Time Mage. That's it. That's all there is to it. Yeah, there's other stuff you can cast. You can cast Slow, you can cast Stop, Gravity, Meteor, always a fun one, Reflect, different things like that you can do, but the issue is you just make everyone fast and then tear them apart with other characters while the Time Mage continues to make them fast. That speed advantage is just absolutely insane, especially because it hits in an AoE and it casts extremely quickly. Everything else is pretty much unnecessary. Now, the other thing that makes Time Mage really nice is the fact that you can unlock the Swiftness ability, a support ability that reduces the charge time for spells, abilities, things like that. So you kind of wind up in this situation again where, much like White Mage, Time Mage is something that you dip into for a little while, get Swiftness for any casters or anything with a long charge time that you're trying to use, potentially pick up Haste and maybe a couple of other spells if you feel like it, to slap on another class, another type of support character, and then ditch Time Mage. You don't have to. They're certainly viable all the way up through the game, but you avoid better options, and their classes' special abilities are far better on other jobs. So, I love Time Mages. I love their design. I love what they do. It was one of my favorite classes in the game when I was a kid, but doesn't really have the same oomph anymore that it used to. So, solidly B tier. I feel pretty good about that. Next up, Mystic. This is where I might annoy some people. Mystic is an A tier class. Fight me about it. So Mystic is interesting. Mystic is a ranged enemy debuff class. Lots of paralysis, blindness, poison, other such effects, HP and MP drain, that are going to kind of harry your foe and not directly blow them up, but make it a lot harder for them to do certain things. And a lot of people are of the opinion that it's better to just run a Black Mage and just blow them up. And while that can be the case sometimes, what's nice about an Oracle or a Mystic is the fact that they can actually do melee combat and have these ranged kind of disruption spells. And when you have certain types of enemies that can be pretty nasty but are vulnerable to those effects, but maybe you can't quite blow up immediately with a Black Mage, that's where the Oracle becomes really nice. being able to paralyze something, blind it, keep it from running at you, reducing its faith, reducing its bravery, and then running up with a 2-range stick and jabbing the crap out of them because it scales off of your magic attack, not your physical attack, that is choice. Combine that with the fact that you get things like your MP shield and your water walk and like fun utility pieces like that granted are better on other jobs, but still, the Mystic actually can hold its own for the entirety of the game. Keep its magic attack up, slap things with poles, throw around status effects. It's not going to be the single most effective thing that you can do, but it's far better than people give it credit for, and I love it as a class. Now, speaking of classes that I love, Dragoon, Lancer. Job, big stick. Big poke with big jump and big stick. It's a very simple class, and that actually kind of winds up coming to its detriment. Lancers and Dragoons are super cool because they have all the tankiness of Knights for the most part, with a 2-range weapon type with spears, while still being able to have shields, and then also having the jump ability that allows them to jump on an enemy from a great distance and deal a ton of damage to them after they land. It's not immediate, it takes some time for them to land, and you have to actually time when they're going to drop in the hopes that you actually land on the enemy before they move, because if they move, you miss and you wasted your turn. It's a very high risk, high reward kind of gameplay style that if you can figure out what the right timing is, you can do a lot of damage, but it's oftentimes not worth it. Different things can happen, different things can change. You can wind up missing your attack, an enemy can block it. It deals good damage, but not like insta-kill damage, which is kind of what you want from a skill like that. It's a little tough to recommend, as much as I think it's the coolest thing ever, and definitely thought it was the coolest thing ever when I was a kid. We have way better iterations of Dragoons in other Final Fantasy games, especially in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, where they have jump and then elemental breath attacks and other fun stuff like that. So they're a little disappointing in FFT. I still like them, and they're still a very solid damage dealer. I think they're very solidly a B class, but they're limited, and if you can't get their jumps to work, especially with how long it takes to unlock all of the skills that you need to get all the different ranges, it's not the great. It's not the greatest. There's better options, for sure. Geomancer. This is another one that might trigger some people a little bit. Geomancer, roll. Mixed ranged magical damage, melee physical attacker. It's a little bit of a strange combination, and the idea being that each of their spells are actually a free cast geo effect that will change its damage type and what potential status effect it puts on based on what tile the Geomancer is standing on. It is very long range, it doesn't require any charge time, and the damage is fairly low, but it does hit an area, and you do get a lot of very useful status effects, like your basic grass Tanglevine cast from all like basic plants, flowers, grass, plains, terrain, that type of thing. Hits for a good amount of damage and can stop enemies. That's insane. That is so strong. For something that you can cast for free at huge range and still deal damage with, it's not bad. And while Geomancer's magic damage might not seem great at first, it's never going to compete directly with a Black Mage. What's nice is it does actually scale decently well if you lean into your Geomancer's magic attack, or if you put Geomancy on a Black Mage. Combine that with the fact that they actually do have pretty solid physical attack stats. Accommodate for the fact that it takes a while to learn all the geomancies, so you may very well find yourself in situations where you just don't have a tile you can get to that actually allows you to cast your class's one ability, so that really sucks when it happens. But Geomancer is a very solid class. I don't think it's any better than B. People really don't like Geomancer, but it certainly has options, and it's actually one of my favorite classes for Ramza because of his perfectly balanced physical and magical attack stats. Especially in the mid-game, he makes for a very solid Geomancer. And again, if you want to have some free, like, no charge time, MP, anything like that, magic to use on your Black Mage, get some Geomancy, slap that on there, and they can pick away at enemies and cause status effects before you start casting the big spells. It's cool. Next up, we have the Mediator. This is an interesting one. Mediator is one of the most unique classes in the game, as its entire goal is to just talk enemies down and talk allies up. All of its talk skills do strange status effects or stat buffs for free, but generally with pretty poor chances to actually land. The most notable thing about the Mediator, other than the fact that they can use guns, which is always a solid choice for any class that can use them and actually can get the skill equip gun that you can then put on other classes, which is a lot of fun, is the fact that the Mediator can actually be used to persuade enemy targets and monsters to join your cause. This is a permanent persuasion. So if you have a mediator or someone with the talk skill that you've learned from that job and equipped on whatever they're using now, you can go up to an enemy on the battlefield and try to persuade them to join you. It's generally a pretty low chance to hit. I think the highest I've ever seen is like 40%. If you've got bad zodiac alignment, it's like 10%. It's rough. But you can get that character to join you. They will function as a guest for the duration of the battle. And then I believe so long as they survive, they will then offer to join you as a fully playable character, bringing all of their gear, skills, and everything else with them to your team. This is a lot of fun, and it can be a really nice way to get some powerful gear and potentially fill a hole in your army if there's like a class that you've seen that you don't have access to yet, but that the game has now shown you, which a lot of times happens for new classes. You'll fight them before you get the chance to unlock them yourself, unless you really know what you're doing and have ground a lot, but whatever. That can be a nice way to fill out those gaps, but it's very niche. And the other mediator talk skills, not the best. Like, yeah, you can raise Brave, you can raise Faith, which is really nice. It's good to slowly grind those over time. You can potentially put enemies to sleep, different things like that. But typically, there's easier ways to achieve the effects that the mediator brings to the table while having a more capable combat unit in the process. The ability to sit in the back and snipe away with a gun while you do these talk skills is certainly nice, but it's a pretty niche option. I'm going to say that, honestly, it barely sits above D. It's C, but it's going to be like bottom of C for sure. It's rough. Next, though, Summoner, one of the most iconic classes in Final Fantasy Tactics because of its very distinct unicorn headband and green cloak. Super, super cool class. Allows you to summon the power of the gods to rain down fury and chaos upon your foes in a distressingly large area that can catch most of the enemy team if they're kind of not properly spread out and deal a good amount of damage. The big thing with Summoner is that their spells cost a lot of MP and they tend to take a lot longer to charge, while not necessarily dealing as much damage as more focused, smaller spells like those brought to the table by Black Magic. That said, you get a wide array of elemental effects, far more different elements than you would get with Black Magic, things like earth and water and that type of thing, as well as like your normal lightning, ice, fire, etc. And you get that bigger area of effect, and you can get support skills as well. Things like Golem that will actually block a certain amount of physical damage for the team when anyone's affected by it. Carbuncle that can put reflect on your whole team. Big AoE healing. There's nice options there. And then also big AoE damage with big spells like Bahamut and Cyclops. The big thing with Summoner is just that charge time. It can be really tough to actually get a spell to go off. And by the time it goes off, have the enemies that you wanted to hit still be in the area that you wanted to hit them. If you have swiftness, you have good spell casting time, and maybe you've been able to like slow enemies, things like that, it could certainly work. It's not a bad option at all, and you're more than happy to have a Summoner on your team by the time you get access to them. But I don't think they're quite S tier. I don't think they're quite S tier. A tier feels like a really good spot for Summoner. They're very good, don't get me wrong, but over the years, as I've just replayed the game, I've always found myself gravitating back towards things like Black Mage that are simpler and more effective, and a lot of times that's what you want. Now, we're getting into the end game here, and we start it with ninjas. Ninjas are S tier. We'll talk about why. Ninja roll, damage, and a lot of it. Range damage, melee damage, dual wielding, being a horror on the battlefield, especially if you're trying to defend a character that is too stupid to defend herself and will get blown up by cadres of ninjas. Ninja is pretty much the pinnacle of melee damage dealers. They're the class that gives you the ability to dual wield weapons for all of the insane damage that implies, because you get full damage with both weapons. They have insane speed, very good move range, great jump height, and they can throw items as well so that they can still be dealing damage even as they're running up on you. And based on the item that you're throwing, can be a lot of damage. From basic shuriken and elemental bombs that deal okay damage, from taking entire great swords and just overhand hucking them at something to stick through their chest, all like 7.5 feet of sword to just drop someone to the ground. Ninjas are disgusting. They can throw pretty much anything in the game. They're a good source of inventory clearing. If you haven't maybe been selling all of your weapons, you can just start hucking them at the enemy for good damage. They are a ton of fun. And if you want just a raw beat stick that's going to be surprisingly hard to take down, really fast, and have wickedly high damage, Ninja is the way that you want to go. They're pretty simple, but they're just insane killing potential, and the fact that they can give dual wield to any of your other jobs, including things like, oh, I don't know, knight that allows you to dual wield knight swords, which is insane. Makes it an absolutely phenomenal job. No questions asked. Next up, we have Samurai, and I love it. This is actually one of my personal favorite classes in the game nowadays, but I don't think I can, in any good faith, put it in S tier because it's just weak enough to fall out of that point. But what is the actual class identity here? What does this job do? Again, like the Geomancer, good physical melee range damage with a surprising amount of versatility and damage in sort of mid-range magical effects. The Samurai is a very interesting type of class. It actually uses its katana to summon the spirit out of the katana to do a number of different effects, typically in like a 2-square radius around the Samurai. A lot of these are damaging effects, some of them are healing or giving allies protect and shell, and there are a few effects that are a different range, like Kikuichi Manji, I believe it is, which is a 5 or 8 range single line that does like a shockwave attack. It's very cool, and the nice thing about the Samurai is if you actually lean into its magical attack stat, it can deal really good damage. Slap the Iaido skills or draw out, again if you're an old head, on something like a Black Mage that has insane magic scaling, and they will deal a ton of damage, or even just lean into it by putting like a Wizard's Robe and maybe a Mantle that boosts magic on your Samurai, and watch as they deal a surprising amount of damage. Combine that with the fact that they have Shira Hadori, one of the most busted defense skills in the game, even after it got nerfed in the re-release War of the Lions. They are surprisingly resilient. Great HP, good physical attack, good magical attack. These are great all-rounders, and it's where I typically wind up having Ramza end up if I'm not doing anything fancy with him. He makes for a very, very good Samurai. If you've not messed around with Samurai too much, I highly suggest that you do so in the future. They're a ton of fun to use and add a lot of versatility to the team. Now, the last two quote-unquote normal classes that we have here, the Bard and the Dancer. This is, in a way, the same class. It's these two right here. The Bard is the male version, and the Dancer is the female version, and they have very similar roles and very similar effects. The Bard sings, and the Dancer dances. Shocker, I know. The goal is to use a song or a dance, and then stick your Bard or your Dancer in a corner away from the enemy, and just let them do their thing. Every time that their turn would come around for the ability to trigger whatever effect you chose, it will trigger again automatically for free, and just keep doing it over and over every time their turn would come around. For the Bard, this is all support skills. This is why I can't really give like a single idea description because the Bard does one thing and the Dancer does the other. But the Bard, support for free at infinite range, but weak effects. Think very weak healing. Think very weak status buffs. Things like that. That's what the Bard does. He wants to make your team function well while not needing a lot of resources or some random chance to get it to happen. It'll just happen. It's not always the most useful effect is the problem, and it takes a whole character, one out of the typical 5 that you can get out of your roster, someone that could be dealing more damage or having a more powerful support effect. So, I can't really recommend the Bard all that much. I don't tend to use them. I think they're pretty much a C tier class. Look at this. We're getting really balanced right now. Huh. We're not going to be quite balanced by the end, but I'm actually pretty happy with that. I didn't intend for that to happen. Anyway. Yeah, Bard, you can just get better support effects for what Bard can do. They're kind of limited with their instrument choices. They can't really deal great damage, and if you're dealing damage with them, you're not using their songs to begin with, which is like, okay, what's the point at that point? They're fine. They can have some niche fun options, but it's not really the best. Now, Dancer, on the other hand, very different story. Whereas Bard is your support specialist that wants to buff up your party, Dancer wants to debuff and damage the enemy party. All of their skills are paralleled here, whereas the Bard can do the AoE party-wide heal for a low amount on your party, the Dancer can do an AoE enemy-wide party damaging effect on that party. The thing about this is debuffing the enemy incrementally over time, typically way more powerful than incrementally buffing your team, because you're often outnumbered with enemies in weird positions that are going to take a while to get to you. With a Dancer, you can be slowly picking away at their attack, slowly picking away at their speed, or even slowly picking away at their HP, so by the time they actually get to your party, they have been weakened severely and are not nearly as much of a threat as you might once have expected them to be. There's really nothing funnier than having a knight stride up to you to finally hit you in the face after like 5 turns he's been making his way across the battlefield, and then dealing like 5 damage because he's had his attack absolutely shredded by your dancer in the corner who's just shaking her hips like a mad woman and I guess distracting him. I'm not sure how it works. You tell me. But yeah, it's a ton of fun. I love Dancer for this. Plus they get scrolls, which are actually decently damaging 2-range weapons. So they're just all around better than Bards. I really like them. They're certainly not an S rank or even an A rank class, but they're definitely better than Bard. I'm pretty comfortable putting them in B. Now, finally, we're nearing the end here with 1 gimmick class and then 3 others that we will talk about why they're going where they're going. First thing we have here is the Mimic. The Mimic is one of those tech classes that feel like they can just be insanely busted, and can be if you know how to use them, but are just kind of more trouble than they're worth. I'm not really going to put them in calculator tier because they're not hard to set up like a calculator is. A Mimic gets onto the board, and then they'll just mimic the action of allied characters. That's it. Like if you walk up to something with your monk, and you have your Mimic next to that enemy, and you punch it with your monk, the Mimic will punch it too. It's kind of like a weird roundabout way of having something like a Fire Emblem Dancer, allowing you to double up on turns or actions for particular high power units, but having it be a unit that just does it automatically for your allies. And while that's great, in a game like Final Fantasy Tactics, just having another class or another job or another character that has the same potency, but maybe in a different way, different utility, different range, just feels better to me most of the time. If you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty and set up some stupid combos with Mimics, you can, absolutely, but it's just one of those things that always seems like it's more trouble than it's worth, and while it's a ton of fun, it feels completely unnecessary. So, I don't necessarily want to put it in D because it's bad. It's not really. It doesn't really contribute anything on its own to the battlefield, and it relies wholly on your ability to set up situations where the Mimic can perform and what classes you have available for it. So I'm just going to put it in D tier out of weirdness, honestly. I've never been a fan. Fight me about it, I guess. Let me know how wrong I am in the comments, and we'll have a discussion. All right, last 3 classes. Here we go. I want to wrap this up. We're a little over 30 minutes already. I didn't want to go over 30, so we'll see how much I can trim this down. Calculator. The so-named Calculator tier. Should be obvious where this is going. Roll. Taking all of your magic from all of your other classes, rolling it into one, and saying, screw the rules, I know how the rules of the universe work, I don't need MP or charge time, and can hit from all sorts of crazy angles. The idea of the Calculator is that they basically see the fabric of reality and can just conjure magical effects into being using things like math and science and ley lines and the arrangement of the stars and all that type of fun stuff to be able to drop holy on the entire enemy party for free instantaneously no matter where they are. The thing about Calculator is the class itself is incredibly weak. It has the worst growths and base stats in the game, so anytime you spend as a Calculator is going to make that character essentially useless, and any levels you get in Calculator are also going to be useless. So you have to be very careful that you don't hamstring a character while you're trying to get them to learn all of the Calculator skills. And there are a lot, because you need to learn the skill for every different height, every different type of level that is divisible by a certain number, every CT count, like HP count. There's all these different factors that you need to take into account to actually use Calculator spells. And every single one of them needs to be learned. So until you have all the options available to you, so you can kind of flip through the deck and find what's going to have the biggest effect at the moment, they're basically useless. Combine that with the fact that the Calculator doesn't get spells of its own. The Calculator pulls from the learned spell pool of every other magical class on that given character. So if you want them to have the widest range of abilities possible, you have to go through everything. Black Mage, White Mage, Oracle. You can see where this starts to become a problem. It's insanely strong once you have it online. The ability to set up nasty stuff like party-wide haste, or casting death on the entire enemy party, or casting holy on everything on the map, but having your guys set up with gear that absorbs holy so that you heal while dealing massive damage to the enemy, that's really good. But again, by the time you get it set up, what's the point? You could just be destroying anything in the game normally without the need for a Calculator. So yeah, it's insanely strong. It will bust the game wide open if you take the opportunity to get it put together. But it's just kind of boring and broken. It takes way too long to set up. So it goes in Calculator tier. It's technically insanely strong, but it just doesn't really fit. Definitely needs to be rebalanced in the eventual Reborn, remake, whatever. Last two, and these are the two new classes that were added with the War of the Lions update for Final Fantasy Tactics, starting off with Dark Knight. This is also going in calculator tier. Spoiler, so is the last class that we'll talk about in a second. Dark Knight falls into the same type of category where it takes so dang long to get the thing that it's just not even worth it. You need to get every martial-based class like Ninja, Samurai, Dragoon, and Knight to like level, or no, actually, hold on, I forgot. You need to get Samurai, Dragoon, Ninja, and something else that I can't remember. Geomancer, maybe? All to job class, or job level 8, which takes a long time. You also need to master Black Mage and Knight, which are two of the most JP intensive classes in the game. You also need to kill and crystallize 20 enemies with the character that you're trying to turn into a Dark Knight. Not just down them, and then wait the 4 turns for their body to turn into a crystal or a treasure chest. And if it turns into a treasure chest, it doesn't count. By the time you could have Dark Knight unlocked without doing an insane amount of grinding, you are at the end of the game. Your reward is a class with some of the most absolutely busted stats in the game, best in class growths, best in class bases, and every single skill that it has deals such an absurd amount of damage that you're basically going to one-shot everything. It's a bragging rights type of thing. It looks super cool. I love Dark Knights. I'm edgy that way. They're super cool. But there's no point. There's not enough of a post-game to make it worth it. You could use them in the multiplayer. That's pretty much it. Once you get to the point where you have a Dark Knight, you've beaten the game. And then once you have the Dark Knight, if you haven't already beaten the game, boy howdy, you're about to, because the Dark Knight's going to solo everything. It's just one of those things. It's fun. It's cool to do. It's nice to have there for veteran players to unlock a cool new thing. But it's calculator tier, man. It's not needed. It's insanely busted, and the effort to get it isn't worth it in the slightest. Finally, Onion Knight also belongs in calculator tier. This is the second of the 2 new generic classes that were added to the game. And it's not as hard to unlock. You get, I think it's just Squire and Chemist to job level 8. And there you go, you have Onion Knight. What's the problem? Onion Knight is terrible. Its stats are abysmal. Until the character, I can't quite remember off the top of my head. You either have to get every class or every job to level 8, which takes forever. And then the class's skills go through the roof, or you need to get every job mastered, which is an insane effort, an insane investment of time just to be able to achieve. Then it becomes the strongest basic attacker in the game, especially if you get its gear from multiplayer, which is another whole grind, but it doesn't use skills. You just run around and slap stuff with your sword, if I'm remembering correctly. It's hard for me to distinguish sometimes between Onion Knight in FFT War of the Lions and then Chocobo Knight in FFT A2, which also has its own weirdness. But either way, like, if you thought that you were going to be doubly done with the game by the time you got Dark Knight, you're going to be quadruply done with the game by the time you have Onion Knight in a usable state. Like, it's cool to see. It's a nice throwback to some of the other older Final Fantasy games like Final Fantasy III, where you actually had Onion Knight as a job, and it was a ton of fun to use. But yeah, not here. Not here. Once you got it going, cool. I mean, enjoy your thermonuclear bomb. Drop Sarbamba onto the battlefield and laugh as the basic thieves and squires crumple at their sheer might. Until you get to that point, it sucks, and the amount of effort it takes to get there, not worth it. So, and that is our tier list. Let's quick review here. Calculator tier, we have Calculator, Dark Knight, and Onion Knight, unsurprisingly. In S tier, Chemist, Black Mage, Monk, and Ninja. I'm totally comfortable with all of those. A tier, White Mage, Mystic, Summoner, and a Samurai. And we're going to drop Mystic to the bottom of this just to kind of signify that it's like, it's good. Probably not as good as these, but I think it still deserves A. In B tier, the solid middle of the road. You're not unhappy to have these, but there's better options. Knight, Time Mage, Dragoon, Geomancer, and Dancer. I think I'm pretty okay with this order, honestly. pretty okay with this. It's not super serious, but, you know, the farther to the right something is, the closer it is to being in the next tier down. So I'm perfectly okay with that. Archer, Thief, Mediator, and Bard. Thief exists mainly to get its skills, so we're going to put it at the tail end of C. Archer can at least deal some damage and give you a ranged option, so it's not at the bottom of C, but it still ain't great. Mediator gets better range than an Archer and can have some quirky effects that I like. And then Bard can give you some good support options. So, yeah, certainly not bad. I'm okay with that. And then finally, Squire and Mimic. Squire at least is going to give you useful skills that you put on other jobs and other characters for the rest of the game. So it sits higher than Mimic, which is just kind of weird. Cool. Not bad. That's a tier list done. I'm pretty happy with this, man. There's a lot of cool classes and a lot of things that you can do with them based off of how you change skills around and what combinations you do in FFT. But just on its face, as these classes tend to function on their own, this feels like a pretty definitive list for me. So what's the goal of the game today? Well, the goal is to figure out those unique characters. This is going to be a much shorter tier list than the previous one, as there are not actually that many unique classes that the player has access to in Final Fantasy Tactics. Notably, there is one character missing from this tier list, and that is Construct number 8. I will name him separately because he deserves to have his class discussed, even if he's like a weird robot man. I don't know why he's not on here. This is a weird tier list, but it's the only one that I could find that had all of the unique character classes on it. So we deal with what we can, right? We figure it out. Two things to note very quickly before we begin. First off, just as in the previous video, which you can find linked in the description down below, each of these tiers is not necessarily representative of the raw power of a class, but more how powerful that class and character are over the course of the game. Because some characters start really strong and fall off. Other characters maybe aren't as useful until you get later in the game and unlock more of what they have going on. Different things like that. So when we're discussing each character, we will kind of address that curve that they go through over the course of the game based on when you recruit them versus what the end game looks like. Second, I have one specific tier here, the Sid tier. This tier is for one specific character, and that is Thunder God Sid. We'll put him there immediately. He is by far the single most broken character in the game. I've had multiple videos where I've called for him to be nerfed or modified or changed in some way whenever the eventual FFT remake or remaster comes out. He absolutely deserves his own tier above S tier. You can literally all fight me on that. He can solo the game. There's no question about it. Like, try to argue with me about it, please. I would love to have the engagement in the comments. It would be great. But yeah, Sid exists in his own tier, and we'll talk about why when we actually get things started here. But we have a bunch of characters here. Disregard all of the generic classes that we've already gone through. Again, this is the only tier list I could find that had the unique classes listed. And now we're going to get into it. So first of all, the Sid tier, let's talk about that really quick. So Sid exists in a tier of his own because he has all of the abilities of every single Holy Swordsman, Divine Knight, Dark Knight unique class in the game, all wrapped up in one package that also happens to have pretty much the best bases and growths in the entire. Sid as the Sword Saint, I mean, the name is right there, right? He is a saint unlike any other character. He is by far the best character in the game. He can obliterate anything that you've put him up against. Once you get him for free near the beginning of Chapter 4, if you use him, it's game over, right? The game will absolutely become a cakewalk from there. And there's a reason that a lot of veteran players choose to absolutely avoid using him whatsoever or ban him from challenge runs and the like. The sword skills are already so insanely strong that they warp the game around them. And then when you have the ability to use any of them with the best stats in the game, as you can probably imagine, it becomes insanely busted. Sword Saint is by far the cream of the crop. It is the measure against which all other jobs are seen. It's ridiculous. It exists in a tier of its own. Unlike the Calculator tier from the previous video, nothing else will enter the Sid tier. Now, moving on to actual characters that are actually worthy of discussion, we have Agrias. Agrias is the first major unique character that you are going to get, other than Ramza, who we'll discuss. He's not on this list technically, but his class is, so we'll discuss that once we get to it. But Agrias as the first unique character that you are likely to have access to, pretty damn good. Technically speaking, you have Mustadio available beforehand, but Agrias joins you as a guest. and is also a character that you can actually use, so we are talking about her first. Agrias is really good. However, she's one of those characters that begins to fall off as you get later into the game because of the way her growths work. As such, she's going to be a solid A rank character. She's not S rank. Her skills are very, very strong. All of the Holy Knight skills are phenomenal. Stasis Sword, North Swain Strike, Cleansing... Well, Cleansing Strike is okay. But Hallowed Bolt, insane. Big damage and silence in an AoE. Divine Ruin, huge damage and Confuse in a straight line with free holy damage. All the other sword skills, conferring their damage type from the sword onto that weapon, it's just all really, really strong. She's got great stuff all around, but unfortunately, the Holy Knight growths for Agrias tend to fall off. While her HP is really strong and her magic attack is good, her physical attack and her other stats tend to be kind of middling for a physical attacker class. And unfortunately, magical attack, not important in the slightest for Holy Knights. If you want to make like a cool Holy Knight mage hybrid, you could, kind of a paladin thing. Agrias is a good choice for that, especially as a female character. She gets an extra point of magic as opposed to the male characters that get an extra point of strength. But her stats do tend to get a little weird by the end game if you don't wind up leveling her through other classes to kind of fix that. If you do, it's great, but not a lot of people are going to know to do that, especially on their first playthrough. So I think Agrias kind of, belongs in the A tier. A for Agrias, Balthier, immediate S tier. Immediate S tier. Now, if you've not played the War of the Lions version of the game, you might not be familiar with Balthier, as he was added in the PSP release of War of the Lions, FFT. Balthier's Sky Pirate class is just insane. He's got phenomenal stats on par with Orlando, and while you might think, well, okay, what does Sky Pirate do in a setting like this? Well, first of all, it's got improved thief skills. All of his steal skills are plunder skills now and have a much higher chance to hit, so he just automatically becomes the best thief in the game. He also has all of the machinist's specific gun skills, and he can equip pretty much any weapons and armor in the game to reflect the fact that you can build pretty much any character in FF12 the way that you want, FF12 being the game that he comes from. He also has the unique skill Barrage, which does 4 attacks with your equipped weapon for 50% damage per attack. This is a free cast, instant cast, that uses the range of whatever weapon it is that you currently have equipped. So, any given turn, you have basically zero reason to use your normal attack, since you can just barrage and get twice the amount of damage, assuming you don't crit on any individual attack, which will push your damage even higher. It is ridiculously busted. It probably shouldn't exist, but it is really cool and really satisfying, especially if you wind up using Balthier as like a melee bruiser with a knight sword, and then he just comes in swinging with a great sword for 4 gigantic, just clobbering hits to annihilate pretty much anything in the game. Balthier is ridiculously busted. He's an incredibly versatile character, and as such, he belongs in the S tier. Next up, we have Beowulf, and Beowulf is going in B for Beowulf. His class is Templar, and while he is a sword and board wielding knight, he doesn't have quite the same damage capabilities or overall usefulness as some of the other Holy Knights, Dark Knights, Divine Knights, etc. The reason for that is that Beowulf is essentially a Holy Knight version of an Oracle or a Mystic. He has pretty much all of the same types of spells that you would expect from a Mystic, things that inflict blind, faith reduction, bravery reduction, confusion, poison, all that type of stuff. He's the status effect master, and he's very good at that. If you're someone who really enjoys status effect characters, you're going to love what Beowulf brings to the table, because he does it better than pretty much anybody else. This is especially true for his chicken spell, which will drop any target's which will drop any target's bravery, I should say, by 50 whopping points. That is at minimum half of a target's brave, and likely far more than that, seeing as how a lot of NPCs don't have particularly stellar brave to begin with. This is already good if you're trying to reduce a character's ability to get counter abilities to trigger, because your counter abilities are based off of your brave, or if they happen to have knight swords, your knight sword is based off of partially your brave stat. Monks, same thing, their physical attack is based largely off of their brave. But if you drop a character's Brave to below 10, they actually literally turn into a chicken and run around aimlessly trying to get away from you, getting 1 point of Brave back per turn until they surpass 10, at which point they turn back into their normal selves. This is incredibly debilitating. It is one of the best status effects that you can inflict in the game, and that alone makes Beowulf really strong. Combine that with the fact that he's got very good stats, he's got a good versatility of armor that he can equip. He's a very solid character. Like, if you have a knight, just a generic knight, honestly, replacing them with Beowulf, not a terrible choice, unless you're really relying on those arts of war. That said, compared to the other unique characters on this list, Beowulf does not have the slaying potential that any of the rest of them have, and he is quite nice, but he's not going to reach the same types of zenith as a lot of other characters are. Next up, we have Cloud. Yes, if you didn't know, Cloud from Final Fantasy VII is, in fact, in Final Fantasy Tactics. Cloud is a very interesting character, and I'm tempted to put him in C for Cloud just for the memes, but I think he belongs in B. The thing about Cloud is he needs to have his Materia Sword equipped to be able to use any of his abilities. His abilities are pretty much all of his limit breaks from Final Fantasy VII, and they're pretty nice. They go from the basic Braver all the way up to Omni Slash and everything in between, and they can deal a lot of good damage or have some good status effects on them. The problem is that the Materia Blade is not exactly the strongest sword in the game, and also they have a very, very long charge time. So, to make Cloud useful, you need to put a ton of investment into him. Ideally, you're going to want to put him into Time Mage for a while so he can get Swiftness, which will vastly reduce the cast time of his abilities. And even then, it's still going to be difficult to make him useful compared to even some of your generic classes that are just going to have far easier, more damaging abilities to utilize. He's certainly good if you can get him online. By the end of the game, if you've got him all kitted out, he'll be a very, very solid character. But the amount of investment required and the fact that he starts at level 1 when you recruit him and has next to no abilities, and you have to find his sword through a semi-convoluted jumping item finding mission on a map, and it's very annoying. It makes him not the most useful. His raw power that he can have bumps him up out of C tier, but he's really not a great character, and Soldier, unfortunately, his unique class, is not a great class here. It's a rough showing for one of the most well-known and popular protagonists in Final Fantasy history. Moving on to Luso, a much less well-known and much less popular character. Luso is, I believe, a game hunter is his class or something along those lines, and Luso is an S tier character. The reason being, he shares pretty essentially stats and a unique class with Ramza. Both Luso and Ramza wield the unique Squire class with their own unique form of metal, otherwise known as Fundaments for Squires, where they get access to a bunch of awesome abilities, things like Yell and Steal and Focus and Shout, all these very simple stat buffing abilities that can turn them into absolute monsters. Combine that with the fact that they can learn Ultima if they get hit with it, and they can equip a very nice wide array of abilities and attacks. Makes for a very versatile close combat unit that's very tanky and can do a lot without being particularly fancy about it. Luso is nice because he also has the built-in poach ability as a game hunter, meaning any monsters you slay with him while he's in that job will immediately be poached, and you can go buy items from their corpses at the shop, which is awesome. But overall, this base form of Squire is really, really nice, and you could be forgiven for leaving Ramza and Luso in this class for the entirety of the game. The stat buffs alone make them crazy, the built-in poach for Luso is awesome, and the base stats and growths are both really, really nice. So, while it's not flashy, it's extremely versatile, and it is a very strong choice from the moment the game starts, thus earning a slot in S tier, even if it's not as powerful just in raw damage as other S tier classes. Next up, we have Malik or Marek, and unfortunately, he goes directly into C tier. Malik is a Hell Knight. I don't remember the retranslated name for the War of the Lions version, but he shares a sort of similar class with his sister Rafa, wherein they are able to use their mantras on a semi-short cast time for most of them to cast a barrage of single target damage abilities in a random area. Most of them are in the typical plus shape of most Final Fantasy Tactics spells. Some of them are a slightly wider area. The problem is you never know where those spells are going to land. At all. You have no idea. You could have anywhere from 1 hit to like 8 or 9 hits from most spells on any of those squares. If you have a target-rich environment where enemies fill all or at least most of those squares, great. You're pretty much guaranteed to hit some stuff and deal some decent damage. But more often than not, you're only going to get 1 or 2 targets within your range, and there's a very solid chance that you don't hit them with even a single cast of the spell. Combine that with the fact that the Hell Knight in particular, Merrick's class, his mantras scale exclusively off of how low his faith is. And lowering a character's faith is pretty damn hard. Now, Merrick's faith comes in pretty low to begin with, but considering you want to drop it even lower and then also stack as much magic on him as possible to be able to deal as much damage as possible with the single hits that you get, it's just a lot of work for very little payoff. Now, what's nice is Merrick's gear is essentially the same as that of a Mystic, so you can use him as a pretty decent magic damage melee fighter, but he's not particularly tanky, and his skills really don't want him to be in melee range, so it's a very contradictory class. It doesn't work great unless you're planning to turn Merrick into a Dark Knight, which also wants its faith to be as low as possible so that its attacks deal the most damage as possible, but that's very niche. It's going to take a very long time to get online, and it certainly falls outside the scope of this discussion since we're talking about his unique class in particular. Merrick, not great. Probably the bottom of the barrel here. Now, Meliadul, what once would have been an A-tier class with her Divine Knight becomes S-tier, and the reason is because Divine Knight was changed in War of the Lions. It was changed in the way that originally, if a character didn't have a piece of armor equipped that matched the spell or the ability that you were using, you just could not use that ability on them. It would just miss, right? Because Divine Knights break gear. They're essentially a Holy Knight, but all of their attacks or all of their skills are single target, and each one targets a different specific piece of the opponent's body. When you hit them with that ability, it will shatter the gear on that slot. So if you do some sort of like shatter helm attack, I don't remember the exact name for it, it will shatter their helm and deal a very nice chunk of damage. And that goes for every single piece of gear that they have equipped. Now, in the new version, in War of the Lions, you actually deal bonus damage to any human enemies that don't have armor in that slot, or just flat bonus damage to any monster that can't have armor in that slot. And that damage, combined with the base stats and growths of the Divine Knight, make them super gross. Like as single target damage dealers, especially against boss enemies, Meliadul and her Divine Knight class are going to be a nasty Slayer option, and you combine that with the fact that they have the versatility to shatter any troublesome piece of enemy armor on the battlefield, is really gross. Meliadul also has the benefit of having better growths and base stats than Agrias does, and it just makes her an all-around really solid choice for a character. If you haven't used her and you're playing the War of the Lions version of the game, I highly recommend that you check her out. Next up, we have Mustadio, and Mustadio, the Machinist, goes in B tier. Mustadio is one of those characters that starts off really strong. His ability to use guns, his ability to disable arms or legs, or even petrify undead enemies is really nice. But as the game goes on, those very limited options start to hurt him more and more. Your raw damage output becomes better and better, so status effects that disable enemies become less useful. You run into fairly few undead enemies, and his overall stats are not the best. He is extremely fast, one of the fastest characters in the game, especially with his Machinist class, which is really nice, but his skills are nothing to write home about, and until you're able to get a magical gun to put on him, his damage output is going to fall off pretty quick. Even then, his magic output, or his damage output, is not going to be great, because his magic stat isn't great, unless you spec him into another class to get magic growths, which you can do. But considering just what Mustadio brings to the table, what his skills are, and what his stat growths are, he's not the best. He's not terrible. He'll always have a use, unlike something like Merrick, where you're basically relying completely on RNG, but he's definitely got his weaknesses, for sure. We're down to our last two characters here, and we now must talk about Rafa, the Heaven Knight, or I believe Sky Knight. Rafa, unlike her brother, does not belong in C tier. She goes solidly in B tier, and it's for one reason. Her spells scale off of how high her faith is, as opposed to how low her faith is. And as a result, her damage output is generally going to be much higher. Combine that with the fact that she is female, so her class gets the extra 1 magic point rather than the extra 1 strength point, and she's just generally going to be more useful than Merrick ever is. It's very easy to boost faith with things like an Orator and different faith up abilities as opposed to reducing it permanently, and overall her damage output is actually pretty solid to begin with. I think her Sky Knight class actually has better magic growths and bases than Marek's Hell Knight class has. So it's a pretty solid package. You're still relying on random chance, which really does hurt, but when each individual blast of a magic cast is going to deal more damage than each individual blast from the Hell Knight, it generally feels a lot better, and it's honestly not too bad. I do like to use Rafa. I like to reclass her into other classes that are going to have other magical attacks that she can use if I'm not confident in the random chance hitting of her different mantras. She's honestly kind of solid. If you haven't used Rafa, especially in the War of the Lions version, where the accuracy and number of hits of all the mantras was buffed to make them a little bit more useful, you should consider checking her out. She might actually surprise you. Finally, we have Race, the Dragon Soul, I believe, or the Dragon Kin, if I remember correctly. Race is an interesting class. I think she also resides pretty solidly in B, because her breath skills are just kind of okay. Race is an interesting character because she actually starts as a dragon, and then over the course of unlocking her in Beowulf, she becomes a human. But unfortunately, she actually gets weaker once she does become a human. Her gear options are fairly limited. Much like Aegre, she has a lot of HP, but her other stats are just kind of okay. And her Dragon Breath skills don't hurt as much as you would expect. You're kind of really relying, honestly, on being able to match elemental weaknesses on certain enemies, and a lot of enemies don't even have those, so you're just kind of hoping that she's able to deal decent damage with her breath attacks without really much recourse for anything else if you find yourself in a situation where they aren't going to work out. Even her Holy Breath, that you would expect to be really nasty because, like, it's holy, hits in a random area in much the same way as Rafa and Malik, so you can't really rely on that either. It's really rough. It's a real shame. Like, you expect her class to be so cool once you get her, and then it's just kind of very average. When she hits, and that's part of the reason that she's in B, but it's definitely low B. I would not rely on Race as any sort of, like, heavy carry character for your army. Also, finally, because I forgot, since he's not here in the list, we have Construct number 8, or Worker number 8, whose class is just Construct. This is a very interesting character, as he doesn't learn new abilities. He's basically considered to be a monster, but the abilities that he has, as well as his stats in general, are pretty insane. The Worker class, the working class, has a very unique set of circumstances wherein all of its abilities are devastatingly powerful, but they all also cost HP to use. You have a ton of HP and a lot of attack and physical defense, but your magical stats, well, you don't have any magical stats, really. You have 0 faith because you're a machine, so you don't really get hurt by magic. And you also have 0 magical attacks that would do nothing anyway because you have 0 faith. So it's really all about the physicality with Worker 8, and he is very tanky, but you do need to keep in mind that you're going to be losing HP every single time you use an ability, and unless you have items on hand, you're going to have a hard time restoring Worker 8 to any sort of semblance of health. That said, attacks like his 8 or 10 range laser blasts that deal a ton of damage are great for deleting priority targets. He has a number of insane melee range abilities, some of which have the chance to instantly kill a target and other fun such stuff. So while his move range is slow and he can't equip any extra abilities or gear or anything like that, he's still a really nasty force, and I would say that Worker 8 belongs in S tier as a result. Honestly, just that sniper blast makes him worth it alone because there's so much stuff you can just delete with him as long as you know where you're aiming and how to get him into position for it. Okay, so I have my list here. Let me pull this up. First things first, we're just going to go through in direct order of what all of the wiki has listed for creatures, which is generally the order that you encounter them in with a couple of exceptions. We'll talk about what each monster family can do, the different permutations between the 3 types that they can have, how useful they are, and then we'll move on. So, first of all, of course, it's the classic Chocobo. Now, Chocobos, in terms of raw power, not the best, right? Like, there's definitely stronger stuff like your behemoths and your hydras and all that type of fun stuff. But in terms of overall utility and general party versatility, I'd say Chocobos are pretty high up there. I'm going to put them in a solid A. Having the ability to have a mount if you need it, as limited as that is in Final Fantasy Tactics, especially with black Chocobos that can fly a character around, there's definitely certain situations where that can be extremely useful. And then just having the ability to have a free instant cast AoE heal, a long range movement, decent damage. I mean, like black Chocobos and red Chocobos having Chocoball and Chocometeor, like they can do some serious damage if you have their stats set up properly for it. Like, they're not bad by any means. You know, they're limited in that you can't use them as a platform that I can think of anyway. We'll talk about that when we get to some of the bigger monsters, but like, can't use them as a platform to jump up to other terrain, but they're all around decent fighters, even though they do have fairly low HP, but especially with the black and red ones that can stay at range, that's really not too bad. And Choco Cure is just awesome. Like, anyone who's had to fight a large group of Chocobos in Finath Creek, you know how nasty Chocobos can get, for sure. Like, it's nothing to sneeze at. Now, goblins. This is one where I don't really know much about what they're actually capable of, but I will take a look in the wiki here. I mean, you've got a bunch of, like, random damage attacks. They're basically monks, where they want to do fisticuffs, and they'll do things like tackle and spin fist, and, like, can kind of have variable damage. The rough thing for goblins is they're very height dependent. I guess because, like, they're goblins, they're short. I wonder if that was intentional. Get Matsuno on the line. Find out. But anyway, like, if you have any sort of height disparity with a goblin, it could actually wind up having a little bit of a hard time hitting you. It's not like a rush or a spin fist or something like that for a squire or a monk where you have an even greater height disparity that you have to deal with. Like, they can rush up a hill and hit you, but, like, it's not going to be a lot of damage. And, like, if you have the height advantage beyond, like, what is it, 2 squares, they can't really do anything. So the thing to pay attention to, though, is the gobbledygook, the green ones. They still don't really do that much for you. They all have counter. All monsters, of course, have innate counter. But there's really not a ton that they're going to be able to do. Like, they can blind you. Yeah, they have Eye Gouge, Goblin Punch, which is, I think, just kind of like random damage. And apparently they can actually get a life drain effect if you have someone with the Monster Talk skill next to them, which is kind of cool. But yeah, it's not great, man. It's not great. Like, if you're going to have a dedicated Beastmaster with a Beast Companion, with a Monster Companion to get different skills, Goblins ain't it. We're putting them in D tier. They're going to be the bottom of the barrel alongside something else we'll talk about here soon. Okay, next we have bombs. Classic Final Fantasy enemy. I love bombs. They just have one of the coolest designs. They're just so sick. They have variable usefulness, I would say, both as enemies and for the party. Like, you've got your classic self-destruct. That can be, like, no pun intended, a good bomb ability to deal a bunch of damage, put oil on things. The blue bombs, the grenades, they have, like, the little mini bombs ability that I can't quite remember the name of off the top of my head. I should have it here. Bomblet, yeah. That deals okay damage, but still, like, it's single target directly in front of them, like, eh. Then there's Spark, though. Spark is what the Exploders have, which does okay damage around itself and can be scary. Kind of think of it like you're using a Samurai with one of their draw out skills that hits in like a 2 square area around them. It's not terrible, but again, bomb's really not great in terms of stats either. So, kind of only real use is to run up. You do fire elemental stuff with them if you wanted to have, like, fire absorbing gear and, like, then get some healing based off of that, but that's kind of a very awkward setup to try and do just to be able to justify using a bomb. You can run them up, do some AoE damage, maybe some decent single target damage depending on what type you're using, and then have them explode. Not the best plan. Like, you could just probably pack something that isn't banking on just going in and detonating itself to try and deal damage, right? Like, I'd rather have other options. They're better than goblins, but not by much. I'm going to put them in C tier. Now, we have the cats, the panthers, Red Panther, Quirrell, and Vampire Cat. These ones are interesting. Not as useful as I would say maybe Chocobos can be, but they're not bad. I think I'm going to put them probably in B tier. Because, like, they do have some pretty nasty status effects, especially the Vampire Cat. The regular Red Panther and Quirrell, not so much, but the Vampire Cat actually has some fun stuff going on. So they've got their basic claw attack, they can poison things, which is fine, it's not terrible. Cat Scratch can actually deal a fair bit of damage, because it's got that, like, random damage formula going on, if I remember correctly. Which is not terrible. Yeah, damage equal to physical attack times a random number from 1 to 8. So I can hit pretty hard, especially if it's a cat that has, like, good brave or good physical stats. So not terrible at all. But what's nasty is when you get to Vampire Cat and they have Blaster, which affects Petrify and Stop. this can actually really catch you by surprise, especially if you're like first time getting into the game, you're hitting the later chapters, you're hitting higher levels, you run up on one of these like, oh, it's a funky looking purple cat, but I mean, the cats have never really been a concern before, and then it blasts you from 3 spaces away and petrifies and or stops one of your guys, and you're like, oh god, okay, do I have the items to fix that, especially if it's petrify? Like, you have no way of fixing that. It doesn't just run out like stop. You need to have an item or like the depetrify magic or something. So like that gets scary real quick, especially if there's more than one. That can be a problem for you. That can actually end a battle pretty quick. So I think that because of the vampire cat, yeah, I think they get to sit in B tier. They also get the vampire ability, feast on the target's blood to restore HP and turn them into a vampire. If you're familiar with the Elmdor boss fight, it's basically that. Kind of niche, kind of funny, but I mean, it's a decent way to turn someone against their friends and just get essentially an extra party member, even if they're just kind of like a random berserker. So they're not bad. They're not bad. I don't think they have quite the level of versatility and utility as chocobos do, but like, especially because chocobos are pretty much good across the spectrum of all 3 of them. But if you can get a vampire cat, they're actually pretty decent. Not terrible. I like them. All right, moving on. Now we've got what is easily my most hated monster in the game. They're awesome, don't get me wrong, but my god, the number of battles I've lost to these things. The Mind Flayers. We've got the Piscodemon, the Squidraken, and then the Mind Flayer, which is the red one here. These guys are insane because of one ability, Mind Blast. Disrupt the psyche, destroying the rational mind. Affect, confuse, and berserk. The number of times I have had a cluster of my various different party members and soldiers. We start a map, and there's a Mind Flayer nearby. And he walks up, and from 3 range, in a plus-shaped formation, just immediately neutralizes a half of my party. Now they're all confused, and they're all berserk, and they're just running around, slapping each other, maybe if I'm lucky, slapping the enemy. And unfortunately, berserk doesn't run out, much like petrify. You still have a chance, because your guys could run up and then just physically beat the Mind Flayer and all of its friends to death. But especially in later game maps where you have high-level monsters and potentially very dangerous, like, later game monsters, not having the ability to use your skills or items or magic or healing or anything can very, very quickly lead to your downfall. Especially because, again, all monsters have counter. So if you're just walking up with a sword and slapping something, unless you one-shot it, it's going to slap you right back. And a lot of times, monster counters hurt real bad. So, yeah, I think in terms of overall danger, Mind Flayers are, like, super top tier. In terms of party viability, I'm going to say they're also pretty top tier. I think this is going to be our first S tier. Like, the lesser versions, like, they just have their little tentacle slap and they can blind you and do, like, nullifying of status effects, which is pretty rare to see. But the Mind Flayer itself, like, the actual Mind Flayer, is so deadly. Like, just being able to throw out Confusion and Berserk is insane. And it can really disrupt the enemy's plans as well, even if they don't cluster up the way that players tend to do. So, they also get the level drain ability if they have someone with a Beastmaster, or if they have a Beastmaster next to them, someone using Beastmaster. Which is cool. If you're trying to do some, like, de-leveling shenanigans to then, like, de-level someone in a class that has low growths so that they lose a minimum amount of stats and then re-level them in a job that has, like, the growths you want on them so that they just keep getting higher and higher stats. This will help with that, because I'm pretty sure you can target an ally with it. Pretty sure. But, that's very niche, not, like, combat viable, but the Mind Flay ability, Mind Blast, that's worth it on its own. All right, next up here, we have... we're getting into the undead. Cool. Skeletons. I love skeletons. I think they're just so cool. It's one of my favorite fantasy skeleton designs. Like, kind of having, like, the desert animal, like oxen or whatever it would be. Horned skeleton face. Like, the little boots and the gloves and the cloak. It's so cool. And then they throw their soul at you. It's so sick. So you got your basic skeleton, the Bone Snatch, and the Skeletal Fiend. They're blue, green, and red, respectively. If you're familiar at all with tactics, you're very familiar with chop or knife, as it was called in the original, with that, like, almost ear-splitting ka-ching sound when it would hit you. And it could actually hit pretty hard. It's just a punch, but it deals decent damage. Where things get fun is when you get into the different animas of the different souls. So the basic skeleton has thunder anima, the second level has water anima, and the third has ice. And then you can get wind anima, which is fun if you have a Beastmaster next to them. This isn't the most useful thing. I mean, skeletons make decent frontline shock troops because they're undead, so they can get themselves back up. Potentially? Potentially, yeah. It's not... Yeah, they could crystallize. I'm thinking of a different game where they, like, can only get up. Yeah. They can crystallize, but they can potentially get themselves back up. And then having the ability to have something that just runs up, can deal good physical damage, can have what is essentially an instant cast, single target spell with a different element on it, can be useful if you're trying to deal with like different monsters that have different elemental weaknesses and things. The issue with them, and why they're, I think, only going to rest in C tier, is the fact that they don't, like, you can't get all of the skills on anyone. Like, they just rock one element. So, like, if you're not fighting something that's weak to lightning, then your basic skeleton isn't worth anything. If you're not fighting something that's weak to water, like, you can still deal damage with them, obviously, but if the goal is to, like, make use of the fact that they have these free elemental attacks, it would be so much nicer if, like, the final level skeleton had access to all three, and then also could get wind. But, unfortunately, not a thing, and such, it kind of really kills their versatility. But the next undead, the Ghost family. We have the Ghoul, the Ghast, and the Revenant. These guys can actually be pretty fun. They have a good variety of abilities. They can attack from range, much like the skeleton can, except it's just like a non-elemental attack with ectoplasm. But they do have a decent number of status effects. They have Sleep Touch, which sleep, very, very nice, gives guaranteed hits with pretty much anything, I think including Theft, if I remember correctly, on anything that you've put to sleep. So it can actually be quite nasty, allow you to set up some easy stealing or some big damage, stuff like that. They can also put oil on stuff, which if you have a fire-based team, not bad, because that's going to massively increase your fire damage output if you want to build like a themed team, maybe work a bomb in there, right? Or at the very least have like a fire mage and people with fire absorbing gear, maybe have a summoner throwing Ifrit around, different stuff like that. That can increase your damage output, which is not bad. Then they also get Drain Touch for just a nice little like vampiric lifesteal effect to keep themselves sustained. And if you have a Beastmaster, Zombie Touch. This corrupts the target's flesh, turning it undead. A variety of decent status effects. They can deal decent damage. They're fragile, but I mean, again, they're undead, so they can get themselves back up. It's not bad. They have some niche use, so I would say that they, as opposed to just kind of like variety damage dealers like bombs and skeletons, I'd say the ghosts can probably go up to B tier. Again, you have the ability to resurrect. They teleport, so you can get some decent maneuverability out of them. They have some different status effects. You have the monsters that we've got thus far. I'd say we put them in B tier. That might be one that gets shuffled around, but we'll see. Also, I wanted to mention it now because I forgot to at the top. The whole idea, if you're not familiar, is you can get the Beastmaster ability off of Squire, I believe. Yes. Where if you have someone with that skill standing directly next to a monster, they get a bonus skill. It's kind of really rough to use because like you have to have them directly next to the monster, but you can potentially get some really good effects out of it. So if you want to go for a little bit of like a janky monster build, that is something that you can do. But it's definitely limited. If we finally get like our remake or remaster or something, I really kind of feel like it should either be like an aura radius or just you have someone with the Beastmaster skill on the board and now any monsters that you field get their special abilities. That just feels like it would be like appropriate. You're sacrificing a support skill slot for that and using monsters that are generally going to be less versatile in a lot of ways until we get to the late game monsters than a normal like human character with a job. So like, just, you know, just make it map wide. Screw it. Make it map wide. Make the monsters more viable, please. Okay, so that said, moving on from Ghosts, we have Ahriman, another classic Final Fantasy monster. And I love the little guys in tactics, like with their big like wings poking up in the air, and then they do a little flutter attack on you. It's very fun. We have the Floating Eye as the base form, the Ahriman, and then the Plague Horror as depicted here, the red one. These guys I'm not as familiar with because I usually just blow them up. I've never recruited one. So I'm not really capable of remembering what they do. Let me see here. Yep, Wing Buffet is their basic attack. Dread Gaze is just like a ranged damage attack that the Ahriman gets. Oh, Bewitching Gaze. Right. Can inflict Stone, Blind, Silence, Immobilize, or Disable. And then Doom. Gaze into the ether to find and cut short the target's silvery thread of life. That is actually the Ahriman. That's, I think, our first instance, now I think about it, of Beastmaster giving the second tier monster a new ability. That's really cool. Gaze into the ether to find and cut short the target's silvery thread of life. Inflicts doom on a target. And then the Plague Horror gets Beam if a Beastmaster is next to them. Dissolve magic skills, reducing magic attack power with the overwhelming gaze of a massive eye. That is very interesting. Does that deal damage? I've never seen that before. I think it just reduces magic attack power, which is interesting. That's not terrible. Oh, also, I'm not talking at all about, like, what you can poach from these monsters, because the idea is usability, not, like, recruiting them to, like, kill. People want me to talk about, like, how good they are in your party and, like, how viable they are, like I did with the other job. So if you've been yelling at your screen or angrily typing a comment, oh, you're not talking about poach, we're not talking about poaching here. All right, that's a whole different topic. All right, just wanted to get that out of the way while I'm thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, they're not bad. They're not bad. Inflicting status effects is certainly solid. They fly, so they can have good maneuverability. They're very fragile. Their damage output isn't great, but, I mean, just being able to put a bunch of status effects on them while flying around and staying out of range, that makes them more useful than a lot. I'd say they go in B tier. Notice how we're getting a lot of status effect inflicting stuff here. Like, it's niche. It's not the best. I like Chocobos more because of their versatility. And then Mind Flayers, like, because it hits in an AoE at range instant cast and completely removes a creature from, or any target from, like, proper control and being able to use their skills, like, that's just disgusting. But yeah, these, like, single target guys with variable application of stuff, I think they generally fall in B tier, and I think the Armon belong there as well. That feels right for them. Moving right along, we have the Avis family, the birds, too much boards. And we've got the Jura Avis, the Steel Hawk, and the Cockatrice, of course. These guys are fine. I'm not as up on them as I am with the Aramon. They have their Talon Dive basic attack that deals solid damage. They can use Feather Bomb that does, like, an explosive ranged hit. It's basically just like Chocoball or whatever. Glitter Lust, receive Glittering Gill. I've never seen before. Like, that's apparently an ability of the second tier Avis that I guess you would literally only ever see if you were using it. I mean, if you need to farm money, cool, but, like, it's pretty easy to just farm money in the Mandalia Plains, so, like, eh. And then Beak. This is... okay, interesting. You can get this on the middle tier Avis if you have Beastmaster. It comes naturally on Cockatrice. Attack vital spots with a long beak, petrifying the target. This is your classic, right? You think of Cockatrice in Final Fantasy Tactics or other media in general, typically they're petrifying stuff, which again is nice. Being able to petrify something and take it permanently out of the fight unless it gets healed, that's not bad. It's not bad. What is the chance to hit on that? The success rate of all other abilities are as follows. Magic attack plus power. I mean, it could be good. It's going to be tough to buff their magic, but not terrible. And then they get Peck. Employ a special skill that reduces physical attack power. That's the other Beastmaster skill for the Cockatrice. Not bad, but again, we've got other things that can do this, really. Like, I'd rather just use a Vampire Cat to petrify something, or inflict stop on it, honestly. Because the Vampire Cat is going to be a better combatant as well. The birds are pretty frail. So, flying gives it some extra bonuses. I don't think it's in the same tier as these other status effect guys. We're going to put them in C. Okay, moving right along, we have pigs. All right, this is a fun one. So, I know I said we're not talking about poaching. The main reason that you want pigs is because they poach into really good stuff, like really nice gear, including things like ribbons. Awesome, when you get to the tier 3 one. So we got pigs, swines, and wild boars. Their actual attacks are pretty terrible. Like, they have Reckless Charge, which is physical attack, like, ×2, or physical attack squared times bravery divided by 100. Really ain't great. Like, they've got low move range, they've got low stats. They're not good. They're not good. They can Squeak, use a fierce cry to summon KO'd units from the brink of death and restore their HP. So you can, like, get people back on their feet with them, which is fun, but they have to be directly next to them. And then you just have a pig screaming in your ear to drag you back from the brink of death, which is funny, but, like, just use a Phoenix down. Toot inflicts status effects with an eye-watering miasma. They literally fart. Puts confusion and sleep on things. Then Snort, mesmerize the target with a ferocious snort, which gives the effect of charm. And Bequeath Bacon, the ultimate act of porcine altruism. So, Bequeath Bacon, this is a fun one. I do know this one. It allows you to have a unit level up by sacrificing the pig. So it just gives, I think, 1 free level to the target you use it on, but it's the Beastmaster ability. So you need to breed the max level pig, because you can't find them in the wild. You have to breed the max level pig, then have a Beastmaster, go into battle with the pig and the Beastmaster, and a character that you want to level up, and sacrifice this unit you spent all the time breeding that you could just be poaching for better gear to give someone a level, or even like a couple levels. It's not worth it. There's so many easier ways to level grind. Like, if you wanted to get someone to like a max level without getting a bunch of JP, but there's no reason for that. Like, typically people want JP before XP, not the other way around. So it just ain't great, man. It is not great. Like, it's funny. The pig is a really funny monster, but they're terrible. They're poaching only, D tier. Okay. Alright. Now moving on to the monster-sized enemies. This is where things start to get interesting with the Trents. This is one of the monsters I know the least about. The first rank is Dryad, the second is Trent, or Treant, and then the third is Elder Trent, or Treant. These are like kind of magical healer attacker things. They can attack in a small area with Leaf Rain. They can use Life Nymph to heal. They can use Guardian Nymph to give the life force of leaves to increase resistance to physical attacks, which gives Protect, which is actually kind of cool. And then there's Shell Nymph, which gives Shell, perhaps unsurprisingly. And then finally, Magic Nymph. Employ the life force of leaves to restore MP. So, like, the Treants are kind of like a support samurai, essentially. They're also our first large-sized monster. So what that means is if you have one of these monsters like next to a cliff, right? A character can actually jump on top of them to be able to then use them as a platform to then jump up to the top of the cliff. So, like, I think, what is it? Like, they count as 2 spaces high, if I remember correctly. So say your character has 3 jump and there's a cliff that's 5 height next to them. You can walk one of these monsters up to it. Character can jump up on the monster, and then their jump of 3 will carry them the rest of the way up to the top of the cliff. Which can be handy. There's some maps where that can definitely be useful. I've wound up having access to places I didn't even realize I would because I happen to have a large monster with me. So don't get me wrong, that's nice. And then having a monster that can do a bunch of support in an AoE, I mean, it's not bad. It's really not bad. Honestly, I kind of didn't realize how nice Treants could be. I've never used them in my party much. Once or twice. So, yeah. Healing HP, giving Protect, giving Shell. Restoring MP can be nice, but again, you need the Beastmaster next to them. Of the monsters we've seen thus far, I think this is our second A tier. It's not S tier by any means, like, just bring a Samurai and you're going to be able to do all that and have something that can deal way more damage. But in terms of the monsters, not bad at all. I kind of would view it as similar to the way a Yellow Chocobo would work, but with a bit more healing versatility. So not bad. Not bad, Treants. I was not aware of your game. Moving on, we have the Minotaurs. Minotaurs are going to be one of the scariest enemies that you encounter in the early game because they slap so freaking hard. You've got the Wizenkin, the Minotaur, and the Sekret. And these guys are nasty. They've got their normal pickaxe attack, which is just like a single target damaging attack, but that deals a lot of damage. It's your physical attack squared times your bravery divided by 100, but they have very high physical attack, so that really pumps it. Then they've got Feral Spin, which is basically the same thing, but does an AoE, which can just hew down half your army. Beef Up increases physical attack power by stamping the earth and absorbing its life force. This is where certain enemies can get really nasty. You can actually give this to the base level Wizenkin with Beastmaster, which is interesting. But the max level Sekret gets this, and is basically like having a Squire that spams focus. So, like, they already hit really, really hard. If they start buffing themselves, it's going to get out of hand real fast. Then they get Earth Splitter. This is an automatic ability for Sekret. You don't need a Beastmaster for this. Attack by stamping the earth, dispatching a shockwave through the vicinity. So this is like a nasty, big area ability around them. So again, like, you need to get close to kill the things. But they have a ton of HP, so they're going to counterattack and hit you really hard. But then if you don't kill them fast enough, they're going to use Earth Splitter, potentially after having beefed up, which is just going to chunk your entire army. Like, it's so scary. These enemies are so scary. And then they can breathe fire, which I didn't realize. I'd never seen this. Expel a combustible liquid produced in the body and set it alight, attacking with a flaming breath. 2 range in 4 directions. Element fire. What the hell is this? That's terrifying. Oh my god. Yeah, I think for just raw damage output, like, they don't have anything in the way of real range, like Earth Splitter, technically. But I mean, they're A tier, man. If you want a proper combat unit for a monster, Sekret's got your back, for sure. Now, of course, obviously, like a Chocobo and a Sekret, two very different combat roles, but the way they fulfill those roles and the capabilities that they bring to your party mean that they're both A tier for different reasons, obviously, before anyone gets their hair in a twist about it. So yeah, Minotaurs, brutal. Love them. Malboros, or Marlboros as they used to be called before the rebrand. Very classic enemy. These guys are also pretty nasty. These are all monstrous enemies, so you can use them all as platforms. They can water walk. They have counter. Their main thing is inflicting status effects. They can deal a decent amount of damage in melee as well, and they're very tanky, so you do have to watch that, especially with counters. They got their basic tentacle attack. They can get lick, smear on viscous saliva to form an invisible magic reflecting wall. Isn't that just lovely? Gives reflect, which is actually can be pretty nice. They have goo, belch forth sticky secretions from deep within to gum up the target and prevent movement. It's been a long time since I read some of these ability descriptions. This is so gross. It puts immobilize on things. It's only in melee, so it's not great, but I mean, immobilizing is pretty good. Then, here's the big one. Bad breath. Beastmasters can give this to the basic Marlboro. Oh, I didn't read all what they all are. Marlboro, Ochu, and Great Marlboro. You can get the basic Marlboro this if you have a Beastmaster, and then the Great Marlboro has it. Belch forth putrid stench to inflict status ailments, affect stone, blind, confuse, silence, oil, toad, poison, and sleep. And those can stack. And it hits in a big range, at range. If you get caught by this, you're in trouble. Just like every other Final Fantasy game that has Malboros, you do not want to get hit by bad breath. You need to have people scattered around. You need to have the ability to remove status effects. You need to be ready to have multiple different characters taken out of the fight simultaneously until you can get them back on their feet. And you got to pray that you can do it fast enough before the Malboro does it to your entire party and you just lose. You will just lose. Now, good as that is, and that does earn them a high slot already, this one's funny. I learned about this one last year when I was just trawling through random tactics facts. Told my buddy Eric about it. He didn't know about it either. It's wild. Their main Beastmaster ability, Marlboro Spores. Coat the target in Marlboro Spores, turning it into a Marlboro. The effect is permanent even after battle and cannot be reverted by any means. This is literally never going to happen to you when you're fighting these enemies, because I don't think there's a single enemy in the game that has Beastmaster equipped, and if there is, I think Weegraph might at one point. But even if there is, they're never with a Great Marlboro. So you never have to worry about this. But it's really funny because you can just turn your dudes into more Marlboros for no reason. Or turn like a dangerous enemy on the board into a Marlboro. I don't know what's affected by this. Like, I'm assuming bosses have guaranteed immunity to it, things like that. But like, just looking at a scary enemy mage, you'd be like, Marlboro! Tentacle monster! Become evil! Like, it's only in melee range. Again, you have to have the Beastmaster next to them. It's not practical at all, but it's really funny. The main utility absolutely comes from Bad Breath, and because of Bad Breath, these guys are going to go up in S tier. Like, you just neutralize the entire enemy party with this. Like, if Mind Flayers are S tier, Marlboros are absolutely S tier. But Marlboro Spores is just so funny. Okay, we're down to the last three, and these are the real ass kickers. These are the guys that you want in your party if you're looking for raw damage output. Classic, Behemoth. Again, Final Fantasy Tactics. Not the first time we've seen Behemoths. They've been all over the place since the beginning of the series, and they're an absolute classic. You have regular Behemoths, Behemoth Kings, and Dark Behemoths. These guys are your single target damage champions. They deal disgusting amounts of damage. Gore, attack with piercing horns, will just crush because their stats are so high, and because of the way the formula is. Heave, attack by goring and tossing the target. Huge damage. Also just has the chance to instantly kill something. It can just inflict death. Okay. Giga Flare. Only usable by regular behemoths with a Beastmaster. Attack by bringing down a burst of white hot energy. Range 4, area of effect 3. Massive damage. Actually worth having a Beastmaster along for. Twister. Usable only by the Behemoth King with a Beastmaster. Call forth a tornado to damage the surrounding area. Same area of effect, but where Giga Flare had 0 verticality, Twister has 2 verticality. So you're hitting an even bigger area, essentially, dealing wind damage. And then the Dark Behemoth, Almagest, also requires a Beastmaster. Inflict damage by bringing about a space-time warp set in place by stars twinkling in the firmament. What does that damage look like, you might ask? It's the Dark Behemoth's max HP minus their current HP. So if they have full, or no, you want them to have as low HP as possible. Yeah. Yeah. Because if they've got 798 HP max and they've got 50 HP remaining, you're going to deal 748 damage to everything in a 4 range, 3 area of effect, 1 verticality area. Disgusting. Actual bomb. Like, you have they're S tier. They are just absolutely S tier. They're such disgustingly strong single target damage dealers. And then if you have a Beastmaster along with them, boy howdy, look out. Yeah, behemoths are disgusting, as they should be. They're always terrifying in any Final Fantasy media that they're in. I love them. They're phenomenal, and they're scary to fight on the battlefield as well as scary for the enemy when you're using them, especially if you have a Beastmaster. Finally, our last two here, dragons. Not as exciting as they could be. You know, dragons not exactly unique to Final Fantasy, but we've got regular dragons, which are the green ones, blue dragons, obviously blue, and red dragons, obviously red. These guys have phenomenal HP. They get the Thunder Breath skill. They can get some nice boosts from Race, which is one of the only uses of her Dragoneer class. But in just raw stats, are pretty solid. They have a basic body blow, like charge, body tackle, that deals decent damage. They can attack with their tail as well, which, what is the formula on that? Tail sweep. So charges damage equal to, yeah, your standard monster attack. Physical attack squared times bravery divided by 100. Damage formula for tail sweep is, oh, it's a random okay, just physical attack times random number from 1 to 15. So it can slap. It can slap. But it's going to be less overall power, I think, than if you have like a fully maxed out bravery, like high physical attack dragon with charge. Then, oh, and also you can only get that on green dragons if you have a Beastmaster next to them for some reason. Then blue dragons get Ice Breath, attacks 2 range. You know, you can attack in any 4 directions. Attack with Breath of Ice, very solid 2 range damage, like a polearm range. Ice Breath attack, very, very solid damage, and it's always nice to have extra ice. A lot of monsters are weak to ice. Thunder Breath, this is actually the Beastmaster skill for the blue dragon, and it's built in for the red dragon. It's the same exact thing, just lightning. And then, for some reason, the only way any of these dragons can breathe fire is if you have a Beastmaster next to a red dragon, and then they get Fire Breath. Which, yeah, I mean, they all have the same damage. It's all the same magic formula. It's just different elements. So, like, couldn't you just let him add Fire Breath and given him something else? I don't know. It's weird. It's always bugged me that you can't get Fire Breath on any of the dragons naturally. You have to have a Beastmaster to get it, and there's literally nothing special about it. In fact, I would argue that fire is probably one of the least useful elements to have in terms of, like, bonus damage, so kind of a real shame. Kind of a real shame. I like dragons. There's better options for damage dealers, like behemoths and hydras, the last ones we're going to talk about. But they're certainly not bad. If you want to have a dragon, you're not going to be disappointed. And then they do get a very nice boost if you run Race with them. You give her, like, Beastmaster, Race, Dragoneer, with, like, all of the dragons. That could be a really nasty force if you want to go that route. That could be really nasty. But it's also more niche. For general use, I mean, they're not bad. Not bad at all. But, like, the big guys, there's better. There's better. And speaking of better, finally, this has gone on longer than I expected it to, but there's been a lot to discuss. Hydras. Hydras are terrifying. Hydras are what dragons wish they could be. You've got your basic Hydra, the greater Hydra, and then Tiamat, which is what's shown here. We're just gonna put these guys in S tier. We'll talk about why, but they go in S tier. They have all the benefits of being large-sized monsters. They have massive HP, massive stats. They are horrifying. I'm just going to read this blurb verbatim from the wiki. Tiamats, quite simply, are nightmares. The first ones the player meet will likely have over 600 HP. Their Tri-Flame attack is as dangerous as ever, which comes from the Greater Hydra. Tri-Thunder means fire-absorbing armor no longer suffices for complete protection, and Tri-Breath can decimate half the player's forces in one spew. The player will almost certainly want to get rid of these monsters right away, although taking the risk of an Entice can yield an unstoppable party member. It is important to note that since all types of Hydra are classified the same as dragons, they can become unbelievably powerful with the boost from Race's Dragoner skills. Yeah. You can also poach them for some really nice gear, but we're not here for that. Let's just talk about it. Let's just talk about it, shall we? So, Tri-Attack. Each of the 3 heads attacks in turn. So basically, like, there's a head in front and heads to the sides. This is a basic attack that attacks to the front and the sides of the Hydra. So if you've got someone, or multiple someones, surrounding them trying to kill it and it hasn't gone down yet, well, prepare to get 3 of your party members bit, and bit real hard. Then there's Tri-Flame, which comes naturally on Greater Hydras and Tiamats, but not on the regular Hydra. Each of the 3 heads attacks with Flame. This is range 4, effect of 2 area, so it's basically a plus shape, 4 range. It does it 3 times. So that's a lot of damage with Fire Element. Tri-Thunder, you can get on the Greater Hydra if you have a Beastmaster, otherwise it naturally comes on Tiamat. Same range, same effect, just thunder, or lightning, like the blurb said, so can't just be immune to fire anymore, you gotta be immune to lightning now as well. Then, Tri-Breath. Notably, you can get this on the regular Hydra with a Beastmaster, which is cool. It normally just comes naturally on Tiamat. Each of the 3 heads attacks with Insidious Breath. Has a 2 range in 4 directions, and effect of 2 in 3 directions. So it's a big freaking AoE. And it can just blow things up. It hits 3 times in what is essentially a random area, but a big random area. And my god, it will just tear you to pieces. There's no element, so you can't resist it. You just have to pray that your units are tanky enough, and maybe you get lucky and it doesn't just nuke everybody. Like, that's it. That's all you got. Kill the Tiamat before it kills you. But we're not done. We're not done. Now, if you have a Tiamat, and you have a Beastmaster next to it, potentially Beastmaster Race, each of the 3 heads attacks with Darkness. Dark Whisper. Element Dark. Effect KO, or just sleep. This is the same area of effect as the normal Tri-Flame and Tri-Thunder, but it is a dark type attack, which is exceedingly rare. Has the chance to just kill whatever it hits, and if it doesn't kill it, it's probably going to put it to sleep, which means it's probably going to die very shortly thereafter. Super nasty. Hydras are the cream of the crop. Like, if you can get a Hydra on your team, like the wiki said, you're set, man. Even just a basic Hydra is going to be a really nasty basic attacker. It can get Tri-Breath if you put a Beastmaster next to it, which is absolutely worth it. And then you're going to start breeding scarier monsters like Greater Hydras and Tiamats. So, like, it's late game. Don't get me wrong, you're not going to find one of these early. But if there's any monster that's worth recruiting for just raw killing potential, you're looking for Hydras, especially Tiamat. And that, my friends, that's the tier list. Do I want to make any changes to this? Seeing now Malboro, the Behemoth, and the Tiamat up in S tier, as scary as the Mind Flayers are, it's really just the Mind Flayer itself that's scary. I think we got to drop it down a tier. It's still phenomenal. It's still absolutely phenomenal, but it starts to lose a little bit of punch once you start getting things like Behemoths and Tiamats that can just blow stuff up. So, beyond that, I do think Chocobos are A tier. Very nice versatility. They can fit into a lot of teams. Oh, you know, I just realized I never talked about what Beastmaster ability you can get with Chocobos. I completely forgot. My apologies. So, let's just double check that really quick. So, you can get Choco Cure on red Chocobos with a Beastmaster. They all get Choco Beak, basic attack. Choco Asuna, which normally comes on black Chocobos and can cure a bunch of different status effects. You can also get on yellow Chocobos with a Beastmaster, which is very nice. Having Choco Asuna and Choco Cure on one Chocobo actually makes them into a very potent support force, and that's why I do think that they definitely belong in A tier. Choco Pellets is just their ranged attack, which is very solid. And then Choco Meteor, you can get on black Chocobos with the Beastmaster, comes on red Chocobos naturally. So, really the Choco Asuna on yellow Chocobos is the real game changer if you want a nice support unit. Like, I need to have the Beastmaster next to them, but not the end of the world, really. Like, it is achievable. So, like, I think they deserve their spot in A tier. All the other A tier monsters make sense. The B tier, some, like, slightly weaker, but can have some fair, deadly status effect infliction stuff. C is just kind of mediocre damage and status infliction, and then D is just bad. I feel pretty okay with that. Guys, let me know what you think about this tier list down in the comments. There's been a lot of great discussion on the generic jobs tier list and the unique jobs tier list. And again, a lot of people requested this one as well, so I wanted to put it together for y'all because honestly, it made for an interesting discussion. I've never put this much thought into any of the monsters in FFT, despite God knows however many runs I've put into that game and how many hours of my life. Like, so many runs of that game ever since 1997. But I don't tend to focus on the monsters much. I'll pick up, like, behemoths, hydras, things like that, chocobos. That's usually the extent of what I do, unless I'm really trying to push it. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. How would you change up these ratings? What do you think of my analysis of all of these creatures? Are there things that I'm missing? Am I underplaying or overplaying something? Let me know all of that in the comments down below. Be respectful to each other. Be respectful to me. And remember, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Leg Man. If there's any other tier lists for Final Fantasy Tactics or any other game that you would like me to do, by all means, please let me know. They're quick and easy and fun. Gives me time to work on other bigger projects in between, so I definitely appreciate them. And if you appreciate them too, that's a win-win. With that said, though, I'm going to wrap this one up here. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other, everyone. Bye now.